Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the third day of the Jomba MASIHAMBISANE Dialogues 5, Moving Borders, Lands, Dance as a Practice of Worlding. And the theme we have for today is Worlding Pedagogies and Remembered Histories. And in this particular panel, we're looking at the question, whose voices? We have two papers being given, the first by Alan Parker and the second by Zhiling, and I'm just going to introduce both of them to you now. So Alan Parker is holds a PhD from the University of Cape Town with focus on live art, interdisciplinarity, and public art. He is himself a choreographer, performer, dramaturg, as well as being a lecturer and researcher. He's presented a wide range of work at various festivals and been a live art fellow at the University of Cape Town, their prestigious Institute for the Creative Arts, and since 2019 has been a resident dramaturg for the Live Art Arcade, a non-profit company focused on mentoring early and mid-career artists working in live art and performance. And he's also currently heads the Network for Embodied Research in Africa, a body-based research and community-based initiative established at Rhodes in 2022. So a real combination of research and practitioner. This is also true of Zhiling, who is currently a PhD student at the University of Warwick. And she is a theatre facilitator and practitioner with a great deal of work working across diverse communities, including deaf, disabled, children, and women. Her PhD is considering deaf culture and how that can contribute to applied theatre as a working method, looking at the dynamics between hearing and deaf communities, where sign language is not just a mode of communication, but also an actual theatre working methodology that can be used to conceptualize an aesthetic. And it's worth saying that Zhiling is also a very significant deaf influencer in China. So this is the basis for the work she's going to be sharing with us today. So I'd like us to start with Dr. Parker's paper, and it's titled The When of Worlding, Durational Performance in the Subversion of Time Discipline in a Decolonial Dance Pedagogy. Alan, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers of the dialogues. It's been wonderful so far. Let me just share my screen.
Recording in progress.
Okay, so yes, the title of my paper is The When of Worlding, Durational Performance and the Subversion of Time Discipline in Decolonial Dance Pedagogy. So this paper emerges through critical reflection on performance pedagogy and practice within my own teaching of physical performance, contemporary dance, and interdisciplinary performance praxis, specifically within a university context. So the focus of this reflexive exercise relates specifically to the role played by durational performance and, more broadly speaking, intentional explorations of time and temporality within performance-focused education. The paper frames time and duration as potentially underexplored or neglected even aspects of the performance event in creative arts education within drama or theatre contexts. If we consider performance and performance making in tertiary education as speculative processes of worlding, where students engage performance not only as an expressive endeavor, but also as an opportunity to create worlds and ecologies that are at times alternative or transgressive or critical of the world we experience and its many ontologies, then worlding arguably becomes, as performance does, at the intersection of action, the doing of the thing, space, the place or realm or territory of that doing, and time, the when the doing happens. In my own teaching practices over the years, and particularly over the last decade of active or overt pursuit of decolonial pedagogical practices and the creation of learning environments that do not center a particular ideology or colonially inherited epistemologies, I've observed in my own work an imbalance of focus in addressing these three aspects of performance making. and indeed worlding. So I've noticed a lot of, in my own work, reflection on the specific kinds of action that learning bodies do, in terms of asking ourselves and our students to be cognizant of where certain actions come from, certain techniques, practices, and behaviors, and the often invisible ideologies, or to borrow from Derrida, the hauntologies that these actions carry with them and say about the world and our engagement with it. Similarly, I'm conscious of considerable questioning of spatiality in performance and education contexts, the critique of where a performance happens and for who, asking how do the body and its actions engage with space and place, and what being and belonging, to borrow from Achille Mbembe, in different spaces means for different people. I am, however, less aware of similarly nuanced or layered, pervasive critiques of temporality in performance, asking necessary questions about when does performance happen and what our engagements with time imply about the body and its positioning in the world as a maker of meaning and a conduit for the experience of being in the world. While temporality is certainly much more than just duration, the focus of this reflection is on durational performance specifically, when used as a pedagogical strategy or tool in the teaching and learning of students in theatre, dance, and interdisciplinary performance. What is the relationship between the performing body and time in active processes of worlding? In my experience, time and duration are particularly frustrating factors within institutions of higher learning. It seems as though there's never enough of it, time, I mean. 26 weeks of teaching separated into 13-week semesters, each of 5 days, but with only a few hours, maybe sometimes even only 45 minutes. And both educators and students are required to work in quite rigid timeframes, linking time to experience and expectation, where, for example, a first-year student must create a 4 to 5 minute work, but a second year, it must be at least 8 minutes, while a master's student must demonstrate an ability to create a full-length work, which usually means about 40 minutes, maybe an hour. And I'm also reminded here of Doris Humphrey's 5th point in her well-known checklist of advice for choreographers in the Art of Making Dances, where she says, all dances are too long. A few years ago, I began creating connections. Right? A few years ago, I began creating connections between some of the courses I teach and a creative project in which I'm involved as a collaborator. The result of this was the integration on several occasions of durational performance practices within a particular postgraduate performance course. The project is the Live Art Arcade. It's an NPC established in 2018 by my husband, but also South African performance artist Gavin Preston. The Live Art Arcade is, in my view, quite a unique organization. It occurs only once a year, usually for a single evening, and always in a different location. Its mandate is to bring together a cohort of usually 6 to 8 early career artists working in the fields of live art performance to share their work with each other as a form of community building, but also to introduce their works to new publics as a strategy for networking. The works selected are almost always durational and site responsive, and on the evening of the event, the artists install their works within a range of different spaces where they occur simultaneously for the amount of time that the arcade is open to the public. This simultaneous presentation within a spatial alongsidedness means that the audience are encouraged to enter the arcade unguided and without a map, where their role becomes one of seeking out performances and making decisions about how long to stay with one work before moving on to the next, and which works they wish to return back to. The arcades themselves have in the past involved shorter works that are maybe performed on a loop. Whatever the overall duration, the engagement with time becomes what Shorston has called clock time. It becomes an overriding framework for the event, and then each artist or performance within that unfolds differently in its own temporality, but sort of held together by that overarching moment that's determined by the duration of the event itself. I'd like to play just a short video. So this is documentation of Arcade 2023, which just gives a sense of yeah, I mean, it's a short clip, so it doesn't give a sense of the long duration. 2023's arcade was 6 hours long, and that's been reduced, into I think about a 2-minute clip. But it gives a sense of the multiplicity, so the different things happening simultaneously and alongside each other with an audience. So the arcade itself can be seen or understood as a process of collaborative worlding. Creston has written extensively on this, often linking his thinking around the arcade with the writings of Arturo Escobar and his work Designs for the Pluriverse, Radical Interdependence, Autonomy, and the Making of Worlds. Creston describes the arcades as a world where many worlds fit. Rather than a capitalist or colonial understanding of the one world, the live art arcade actively encourages multiplicity of worlds and times and spaces, a pluriverse of interconnecting, overlapping, and intersecting worlds of difference. Over several hours, this world of many worlds constantly shifts and changes alongside and in collaboration with those audiences, witnesses, or co-participants who exist within it. The first time I introduced durational performance into a course was in 2019. This was not technically part of the Live Art Arcade. It was part of another event that was held at the university currently known as Rhodes' drama department called Open House. But the event was curated by Gavin Creston and followed a similar curatorial approach to the Live Art Arcade, which had several performances taking place simultaneously in different rooms within a single building. So I conceptualized and facilitated a work with a group of 9 postgraduate students called Ecology. The work was improvisational in nature and aimed specifically at creating and developing a series of encounters aimed at sustaining group awareness and cohesion, constantly interrupted by moments of solo-focused individual expressivity. This performance was 2 hours long, and the group explored spatial proxemics, contact improvisation, and real-time composition. At the time, this was the longest that the performers had ever had to perform for, and the most time in the course that we were ever able to dedicate to a single exercise within the curriculum. In 2023 and 2024, I again included participation in the Live Art Arcade as one of the projects for the year. In 2023, we created a work called Basement, following similar principles and improvisational ensemble-focused structures to Ecology. This work involved 4 performers and unfolded over a period of 6 hours, where they were placed in control of all aspects of the performance event. So the performers had touch lights to provide illumination, and they had a series of speakers to provide sound. And they had to work collectively to compose the material of the work, but also to facilitate its sharing with the audience in terms of giving it support in light and sound. In 2024, we created the work Cry If You Want To for Arcade 2024. This work began initially as a spatially focused exercise. So we created an immersive theatre event where we invited the audience as guests to a party where we all sat around a table and the performers performed during the course of a meal. And the focus of the work was exploring that very fine line between gestures of protest and gestures of celebration. So in its first presentation, it was staged as a 40-minute long immersive event, but the work was then reimagined to be durational for Arcade 2024. And so several images and encounters from the original work were stretched, repeated, and accumulated over time, creating an increasingly claustrophobic space where balloons are both objects of celebration, but also treated as if they're explosives, and party streamers become symbols of joy, but also of oppression and subjugation. Watching these different experiences over the years and speaking with the performers afterwards in debrief conversations, but also through their written reflection in terms of course feedback, the different works all share some common observations which surface, I think, a range of potential benefits for exploring time and engaging duration more rigorously in arts education. The first and most obvious benefit afforded by durational performance is the significant break from the extensive effect of time discipline by the university institution and the world around us. Shorston explains, the term time discipline was coined by E.P. Thompson in 1967 to describe a key mechanism in the turn to industrial capitalism, when the clock, where clock time emerges as a way to calculate the labor of workers. Time discipline shifts our understanding of time away from the action itself and sets it in a relational proximity that we as laborers must work towards and in service to. In all of the works explored with the students, each arguably provided a necessary space for slowness and an opportunity to slow down and to engage with performance and the performance moment on its own terms, outside of what Shorston calls the economy of ephemerality, where all performance is inevitably haunted by the specter of its own inevitable ending. In these performance encounters, there is no rush. There's no need to conclude the performance so that the audience can make it on time to the next one, or where your taking time directly steals time from another performance. This can be experienced by the students as freeing, being freed from the responsibility to entertain an audience, to provide them with a carefully constructed whole that they have paid for. In my view and experience, the slowing down of the performer in the performance moment can have a reciprocal effect also on the audience member, inviting them to also slow down, to be in time differently, and to recalibrate their understanding that there is nowhere to rush off to, and that they're in control of how much time they spend with this particular performance. This reaffirms what Shears has noted about durational performance more broadly. Shears states, duration often refers to the actual time that it takes to do things. For performance artists, duration refers to the time it takes to break away from the things that inhibit creativity, empathy, and intuition. In this sense, both performer and audience are invited to share in a moment which is itself a breakaway from the often oppressive and exploitative engagement with time that tends to typify our daily existences for many people. Secondly, durational performance also seems to significantly loosen the desire for control and the exercising of will in collaborative performance-making experiences. Strict understandings of time, expectation, and deliverables often seem to discourage in students and researchers an appreciation or a willingness to play. These are the rehearsals or studio sessions where there's no desired outcome, no specific goals to work towards, and where we walk into the rehearsal room with a plan, but no map, and we find our way to something interesting. Durational performance seems particularly effective in this regard, from my experience, As the work inevitably builds and changes over a long period of time, the subject, in this case the performer creator, potentially becomes decentralized, and thus meaning and experience are able to emerge in unplanned, often unintentional ways. It's much harder to control something that's 6 hours long, basically is what I'm saying. I've seen many examples over the years of working with students and the Live Arts Arcade in general, where it becomes clear that the original plan is not going to work, and something needs to change, or simply that the original plan becomes uninteresting to the performer 2 hours into a 4-hour performance. When performers relinquish control over how a performance unfolds and what it does, there becomes space for the opportunity to concentrate on a single, often very simple idea or activity for an extended period of time, and thus affording one an opportunity to go great depth into something that may at first seem quite obvious. This becomes an investment in the quality of time experienced rather than in its quantity, and in something that we're not often privileged to do in the confines of time discipline. Thirdly, but certainly not lastly, I've observed that many of these engagements with durational performance seem to reaffirm for many student performers that the performance moment is inevitably an encounter, a moment of meeting and coming together where the audience enter into a network, a shared engagement that both of you must work to figure out or make sense of. This encounter is experiential, and it is of the body, and it is constantly in flux, and importantly, is experienced differently by all of those involved. Bergson describes real duration as something that is processual and in flux, a kind of becoming, where bodies in space and time co-compose and share in the experience of being in the world. More so than other experiences of performance, these durational engagements seem particularly well suited to engaging performance and worlding as spaces and processes of potential healing, of the exchange of energy, of the discovery or surfacing of beauty within ordinary acts, and certainly within the creation of communities. This processual and shared nature of being and time is something my students are most often struck by. How one moment that is shared can feel both long and short, depending on who is experiencing it, and how so many different conceptions and experiences of time and temporality can inhabit and exist in one single moment. But mostly, I think they're most struck by how much can happen, how much is possible when we simply have time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. That was really, fascinating and inspiring, and lots of material for us to think about. I loved that you talked about how we focus on the action and the space, but actually less on the time. So we'll come back to that. And audience members, if you've got questions, please note them down so that we can come back to them after Zhiling's paper. So I have great pleasure now in introducing Zhiling Go's work, From Borderland to Third Space, Signdance as an Aesthetic and Theatre Practice. Zhiling, the space is yours.
Hi, I'm Zhiling, and now I'm doing PhD at the University of Warwick. So today, I'm very happy to be here to share my work with deaf and hearing artists to talk about how we play with sign language and spoken language, and from the borderland to third space. So the borderland. The borderland is a space where cultures, languages, and identities intersect and permit one another. This concept is particularly relevant to my practice and research, as a deaf community does not exist in isolation from the hearing world, but instead inhabits a liminal space where deaf and hearing cultures converge and influence each other, thus forming a boundary zone. This boundary manifests in several key areas within deaf and hearing theater practice. First, though, is the linguistic boundary is evident in the interaction between sign language and spoken language. Deaf and hearing theater practice often requires a negotiation between these two different languages, serving to find an appropriate means of expression. Moreover, the use of multimodal communication in performances, where some actors combine sign language, spoken language, subtitles, and simultaneous communication. Simultaneous communication means like sign at the same time I speak, but the sign language I use is not the real sign language. It's followed my spoken language, so it's simultaneous communication. Creates a multilingual theoretical space. Second, the sensory boundary arises from the contrast between visual and auditory experiences. Deaf audience primarily rely on visual information, whereas hearing audience are auditory, right? And theater practitioners must navigate this divide, balancing visual-led and auditory-led forms of expression to cater to both audience groups. And finally, the cultural identity boundary is marked by the distinction between deaf identity and disability identity. Not all deaf individuals identify with deaf culture, so with the capital D. So with some viewing themselves as part of the border disability community or as members of a linguistic minority group. In this borderland, the aim of deaf and hearing theater is not to erase these differences, but to enable both deaf and hearing audiences to recognize and reflect on their respective positions within this intersecting cultural landscapes. And the concept of third space emphasizes that culture is not fixed or singular, but is instead formed through the interactions and dialogues between different culture forces, creating new hybrid spaces. Deaf and hearing theater amplify this third space. It is neither purely hearing theater nor entirely independent of deaf culture, but rather a creative and dynamic hybrid space, characterized by tension and innovation. In this context, deaf and hearing theater is not simply a translation of hearing theater into sign language, nor it is a completely separate form of theater. Rather, it integrates sign language as a core component of the theater experience, where sign language itself becomes a part of the theoretical form, contributing to the performance aesthetic and narrative. In this third space, sound is no longer merely an auditory element. It can be visualized or tactile, bridging the sensory gap and offering alternative ways for audience to experience sound. This fusion of auditory and non-auditory elements transforms the audience engagement with the performance, expanding the sensory range and enhancing the overall theoretical experience. Furthermore, the third space breaks down the traditional separation between deaf and hearing theater, creating a space where deaf and hearing actors collaborate, challenging and reshaping cultural framework with hybrid aesthetic. This model also offers distinct yet complementary viewing experience for deaf and hearing audience, transforming the act of watching into an integral part of the theater. In this way, deaf and hearing theater in the third space does not simply cater to the expectation of hearing audiences. It creates a completely new multi-sensory theoretical experience that fosters a shared yet distinct cultural dialogue between deaf and hearing individuals. And next, I will share my experience working with Signdance Collective Company to further explain it. So now I'm one of the actors in this company. At first, I will introduce a little bit about this company. Signdance Collective Company led by deaf and disabled artists. It established in 1987 in London. and reconstituted as an international touring group in 2001. And Signdance Collective has played a crucial role in developing sign theater by fusing sign language, theater, dance, and original live music. So David is the deaf leader of this company. He said, Signdance Collective's focus is on the process and the relationship between sign language, dance, and theater. The company has pioneered inclusive practice, fostering collaboration among deaf and disabled artists while engaging with diverse communities worldwide. By examining Signdance Collective's artistic practice and collaborative methodologies, today we're gonna see how sign language operates beyond accessibility to redefine theater's aesthetics and cultural significance. And then I'm gonna introduce the working method, Signdance. So in Signdance Collectives, all the artists from different countries, and we have deaf artists, disabled artists, and non-disabled artists, and our first language is different. So, and we gather together, we use English and British Sign Language to communicate. And in Signdance Collective's work, you will see a lot of different language, not only spoken language. We use Chinese, English, Spanish, German, whatever, and also the sign language. We use British Sign Language, International Sign Language, American Sign Language, Chinese Sign Language. So breaking that dominance and making space for coexistence linguistically with other languages opens up the world of a play and demands that an audience listen to and recognize difference. For Signdance Collective, sign language is not only a language on the stage, it is an aesthetic. So all the choreography and aesthetic for Signdance is based on sign language. If the text is a landscape, the landscape needs to be created visually. Signdance, as an art form, bridges the phenomenological and semiotic, in that words are experienced both for performers and audience in a unique way, even if not fully understood, particularly by non-sign audience. It is not only language that's being stretched, but the phenomenological experience of language, which is being altered at its source. For the audience, the melody of a language, the sound of a culture is an interesting aspect, even if they cannot translate the words. They pick up the language in a musical way and recognize the embodied meaning. We engage fully with the text, embodying the language in a consistent choreographic and physical way. We also use sign dance and contact improvisation to show how the characters feel and act with their bodies. It immediately gives you a way into embodying the words poetically, because sign language is both very concrete and abstract. I often think that sign dance is to sign language as singing is to speaking. With a text that is so full of musicality and rhythm, Signdance is the perfect tool to explore ways of embodying and staging. And what is amazing is how much the Signdance can stretch and adapt to different scenes. So sometimes it's expressed by somebody talking, somebody singing, and somebody dancing next to them. Sometimes expressed with everybody in some choreographic sign. So it is a very malleable art form. And how we deal with sign language and spoken language in our work. For example, one person is signing, but the signing is not the sign language in our daily life like that. Is signed choreographically. And the other performance is for example, is his solo. And the other performance will interpret this sign language, but not like interpreter, like I just speak. They use their voice, their bodies, and maybe instrument to interpret it, like choreographically. It's not just simply repeat his words, and they add their experience, their feeling into it. And the audience is witnessing how they're experiencing what he's saying. Thus, the translation is not just a translation, and the language choice made are often more aesthetic than linguistic. So, like which languages we use. For example, we use BSL or CSL, or we use spoken language, we use English, or we use Chinese. So this language choice made are often more aesthetic than linguistic. So from a choreographic and staging point of view, if there is a particular sign that will lend itself better to a particular movement or spatial arrangement, or maybe not even aesthetics, but it feels more truthful to a particular performer at a particular moment, that's the sign that is used, rather than there being a conscious decision that my character will always sign in a particular language. Like I'm Chinese, so I will use Chinese sign language. Not like that. So it's like we interpreted all the language through our bodies, and sign language is an embodied language, so it becomes to our tool. And the music itself is the constituent part that has its own language that is in dialogue with the dance and the theater, rather than being of service to the dance and the theater. The musician is not only a musician, stand on the side of the stage to play some instruments. During the rehearsal and performance, the musician also needs to do sign dance with other performers. And the other sign dance performance include deaf performance, also do musicians' work, use their voice, their bodies, or the instrument, because the musical experience is not just an auditory experience, but a sensory experience of the whole body. So, and now we're doing a performance called Hutchison. It's about media and news, how it influenced people's daily life. And in this performance, we use deaf people's voice, their deaf voice. So their deaf voice, they can speak, but they speak like differently, in different ways. But we use their deaf voice to set up a song, and we sing together. So the song is made based on his deaf voice. It's amazing and it's beautiful. And how does Signdance Collective make dramaturgical decision as an open, collaborative, fragment, multilingual, and multicultural progress? You know, our rehearsal, of course, with great difficulty. You know, I can use sign language and fluently use sign language, but not everyone at Signdance Collective is fluent in sign language, because we also have hearing actor, hearing dancer, but everyone knows a little sign language. And we don't have sign language interpreters at work. This is because we have found that sign language interpreters somehow hinder direct communication between deaf and hearing people in theater making progress. When a sign language interpreter exists, the deaf person is hiding behind the interpreter. The hearing person will communicate directly with the sign language interpreter and will not look the deaf person in the eye. The deaf person feels that they're not really in the communication. But because we don't have interpreter, the rehearsal progress could very easily become a cacophony, but it is more like a symphony. So during the rehearsal, the most sentence we said is, don't talk, do it, show us visually. And there is an interesting thing that is when I work with hearing people, we always spend many times to talk before doing something embodied. However, when I work with deaf people, we work very, very visually, and our bodies are our common language. In this case, we create a space of our own. And then I would like to talk a little bit about accessible in Signdance Collective's work. So Signdance work is difficult. It is difficult for actors, for dancer, and also for the audience. It's not literally, it's like a poetry, or we call it visual opera. The narrative is not a literally narrative, it is fragment. And the Signdance was born on the margins of society, and we work in that in-between space where borders are not fixed. So deaf people are cultural and linguistic minorities in their own countries. Likewise, disabled people are marginalized. So using sign language is a political act, yes, and as well as an aesthetic choice. In that sense, multilingualism is also used to disable the text, break it, make parts of it unintelligible to some audience members. It is both an inclusionary and exclusionary at the same time. We embrace that instead of trying to make it accessible and teach the audience the Spanish, the Chinese, or sign language. No, this is the world. The world is full of languages and sounds, and we do not understand it. And that is what makes it brilliant. And in this sense, I think this is how the disability aesthetics work. It reminds us of our humanity. And Yvette is a disabled leader of the Signdance Collective. She said, accessible doesn't mean easy or simple necessarily. So Signdance work is accessible because it is difficult for everyone. And in my research and practice, the concept of moving from borderland to third space can be seen as a practical trajectory. Initially, in the borderland phase, deaf and hearing people encountered one another and become aware of cultural differences. Hearing individuals begin to communicate using sign language and body language, yet they remain influenced by the framework of their native spoken language and auditory thinking. In the next phase, culture negotiation occurs, where interaction and co-creation take place through theater progress. Embodiment becomes a core approach for understanding deaf culture, where hearing people do not merely learn sign language, but experience it through their body, through theater, both for audience and performers. Finally, in the third space phase, new forms of theoretical expression emerge, such as theater combining sign language and the voice, or stage presentations centered around visual elements. And people transcend the labels of deaf and hearing to enter a co-creative space, generating new cultural subjectivities. This theoretical form is no longer simply the deaf version of mainstream theater, but has the potential to transcend the binary opposition between deaf and hearing cultures, creating new theoretical languages and experiences. This is not only an innovation in theoretical form, but also a redefinition of what accessibility means. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much, Zhiling. That was also a really provocative and really a detailed exploration of actually your process, which is what we're looking at here. So if I can invite Alan back as well, that would be lovely, that we can talk about your two papers, very different, but I think there are real intersections between the work, the explorations, the questions that you're asking. I do have questions for both of you, but I wondered if you wanted to ask each other anything before I leap in.
Yeah, actually, I really enjoyed your paper, Zhiling. This is maybe quite a small point, but I found it really interesting when you were talking about the presence of the translator as a disruptive or obstacle in a creative process in terms of facilitating communication, and it resonated with my experience in terms of like a multilingual, where a common strategy in South Africa is to find a translator. If the language that you speak, or the thing you want to say, you can't be expressed in a language that everyone understands, we try and find a translator in the room. And it doesn't, in my experience, isn't a very popular strategy, and I'm suddenly thinking it's probably because of similar things. But I wanted to ask, is the sort of problem solving that needs to come out of trying to understand each other part of the creative process? Does that feed the how the work develops?
You mean without interpreter, right? Yeah, we have a lot of problem, but I feel like the problem is that we don't understand each other, right? But we have a lot of means or tools to communicate. So, because everyone know a little bit sign language, so we use sign and speak so deaf people can read the lips, and also we use body language. And because a lot of communication is what we're gonna do in this performance. So if you have some idea, you can show it physically, right? So in theater progress, it's very visual and everything is embodied. So you can just show it and because I want to do this. Okay, you dance, you show it. Oh, I understand, right? And also you can find some photo, you can draw, you can write. So many ways to build up this communication, right? And also deaf people, some deaf people can speak, or some deaf people can read the lips, or some deaf people use sign language. So like we work together to set up this communication. Yeah, so like if we get stuck in the communication, we will find a way, go through it. Yeah, people is really smart to address this. Yeah.
So what really struck me across both papers is how you are breaking the normate, our focus, which might be on time, a very particular engagement with time, and the visual, I think, to the experiential. So you're pushing people from what they expect, like dependence on text, or dependence on a passive engagement with something conceptually, often in performance, to a more embodied engagement, and knowing differently. That, as you said, Alan, is processional, it's process-based, and experiential. And I think that's really interesting in the world we live, where people work in very small sound bites. If you ask people to do anything for more or watch anything for more than 2 minutes, I find it interesting that your movie was 2 minutes. Apparently that is the limit when you make a short clip is 2 minutes. That you're actually really challenging the world we're living in terms of expectation, but also then enabling people to have a different experience. So, Zhiling, that I can not just learn sign, but experience maybe a deaf world,
Yeah.
and on an equal level with someone in another situation to myself. So for both of your papers, I found that really interesting. What I'm interested in is if there's any particular pushback in the process or the reception of the work. I mean, you've both been very positive about the work, and I think it deserves that. But I'm quite interested in that is there that pushback, particularly from audiences who haven't gone through your process?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so there's definitely pushback from the students themselves. So I think the idea often of durational performance is quite daunting. And then and it's also something that one can't rehearse. So, you can't have a dress run of a 6-hour performance. So there's a fear, I think, and an anxiety in not being prepared. So there is trepidation and there is fear, but I think it also does, maybe I'm being overly positivist, but I think it does feed into I don't know, the value at the end, where students, do realize that, there's nothing wrong with planning things fully and being fully in control of the performance moment, but I suppose just experiencing the other side, that magic can come from allowing things to happen, from releasing your control over that moment a little bit. And then I think that there's also, in terms of the live arts arcade, pushback from audiences. So yeah, I mean, just in our experience, sometimes people don't quite know what to do with durational work. So there was a one a couple of years ago where somebody sat in one performance for 2 hours, and we weren't sure whether the lady just didn't know that she could leave, or if she was just that transfixed in the one that she was watching. But I mean, the end of that is that it doesn't really matter. I think she had a valuable experience. But yeah, it's interesting to watch, people sort of treat performance sometimes like a gallery, so you walk in and look quickly and then leave. And so we've done a lot of observing and thinking about what do we need to do that make people stay, and also what makes them come back. So because we often, if Gavin and I catch them, we'll say to them, like, do a loop and then go have dinner and then come back and see how things are different, like in several hours. But I think those who make the sort of decision to invest 4 hours in this thing, I don't think they feel cheated, but there's definitely resistance and confusion.
Yeah, I feel like same in Signdance Collective, the audience, especially the hearing audience, always said, "I don't understand. What are you doing?" Like, because Signdance Collective work is really poetry and abstract, and it's challenged the hearing audience way of thinking of what a performance or understanding of the performance. So a lot of, like, also my classmate, or when I was doing MA, they said, "Huh, what? I don't understand." But because Signdance Collective did a workshop in university, my MA university, and we are all very enjoy it. And we said, okay, yeah, let's go to see their performance. They're really amazing performance. And when they went to the theater and they saw the performance and said, what? I don't understand. And they fell asleep. So it quite challenged them. Yeah. And also, another thing, this is for the hearing audience. Another thing is about deaf community. Some deaf community don't like Signdance Collective. They think because we have a lot of deaf actor in it, but they said we never talk about deaf life, deaf performance, deaf problem. Like, they think we need to fight for deaf rights. Like, our performance content is to talk about that, but we never talk about that. We talk about quite universal, like the humans. Because, for example, our performance now we're making is talk about news, media, how this influence people's life. It's not about deaf, specifically deaf people, what's their experience. So some deaf community will think, you're not talking about fight for deaf rights. But we feel like deaf theater or disabled theater or whatever needs to go forward, not limited into it. Yes, we need some people to tell their story, right? Fight for their right. But we can also go forward to talk like broader thing like that. Yeah. So there's a lot of argument. Yeah.
Because, I mean, you're asking people to enter a different world, live differently, and it's hard. You know, we all, as you say, we fear to make mistakes or not know. I'm aware there's only 5 minutes left. Are there anybody in the audience that would like to ask a question or make a comment or anything? Leanne, I saw your camera come on.
Hello, Yvette. Hello, Zhiling and Alan. Thank you for deeply inspiring papers and provocations. I was interested also just connecting both of your papers. Alan, I always find your disruptions around things like time to be totally inspiring because we live in a world where time has become one of the biggest commodities. Recently I was reading an article that said one of the greatest luxuries on the planet is time. The idea that time becomes the thing that you can buy if you have enough money to buy it. But I was interested also linking it with Zhiling. There is this concept in disability studies called crip time, which is about the way in which people living with disabilities are arguing for a renegotiation of the time that it takes to do something or to be in a performance. And I'm interested in that intersection because it seems to me that within disability studies, but also in the extraordinary work that you're doing in this kind of durational performance, is a kind of asking and renegotiating the idea of real time and of what it requires to make and to do. And I'm wondering if there's any connection to that notion of crip time that you might have.
Yes. So, how to say? If I have more time, I will talk about crip time in this presentation, but I don't have time. Yeah. So the time experience is really different between deaf and hearing people. For example, as hearing person in my life, so the time is always linked to the sound. For example, in China, I don't know if that is in the UK. In China, when the classes begin, we have the ring. So ring the bell, and you hear it, and you know, okay, it's 8 o'clock. So ding, 8 o'clock, and the teacher start the class, right? But when I come to the UK, I feel like in the university, so I just did MA, so in the university they didn't ring the bell, so the teacher will not start the class like at 8 o'clock. Then maybe 8:03, 8:05, 8:10, and they start. So, and you know, I found that deaf people always be late, just late a little bit on conference or we gathered together, we hung out together. They're always late or earlier. They're not like on time. So it's linked to the sound because deaf people did not ring the bell. So they have not connection with that. And also, in China, there is a deaf dance, very famous deaf dance. It's like that, and the people in line and like that. I don't know the English of that, but it's like that. But many deaf people in the UK, they don't like that. They challenge it. They said, "What are you doing? It's not deaf. It's really not deaf. It's hearing because deaf people can't do it like very timing thing, you know." And why the Chinese deaf people can do it is because they have hearing people to give their cue. So the hearing people stand in front of them and give their cue 1, 2, 3, 4, and they. So it's not deaf. So in our performance, we don't have this timing thing. Like, so deaf people experience the time like it's like that. It's not that. It's like it's very slow. It's like a river. So in our dance and with the music, we're not like that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We don't count that. So we just experience the sound and music with our body. Yeah, it's like that. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in our context, I don't know if we've engaged like specifically with crip time as a specific concept, but there's certainly, particularly in Gavin's curatorial approach, and one of the things that he's writing about it in his PhD research is recognizing that different things require different engagements with temporality, and so as the programmer, he would kill me for using that word, the curator of that moment, you have to create space and time for all the aspects of difference that are at play. And this can be quite frustrating because, as with, time, discipline exists for a reason. It arguably is there to make things run smoothly, but becomes this oppressive force. So like an example is, often our move-ins for the Live Art Arcade are quite stressful because, some people need much more time. So it's very hard to be like, okay, you have 10 to 12 for your tech, and because the different requirements are vastly different. Someone needs 5 minutes. The one we did this year, we had one artist who needed a 2-day setup and another artist who needed about 10 minutes. And so it becomes our role as the sort of curatorial team, and my role as the dramaturg, to ensure that everyone has enough time
So tricky
to
on
do
a
what they...
curatorial level. Yeah, I mean, you just
Yeah.
raised. Yeah,
And
thank you.
then,
Thank you so much.
sure. And then if I could just, one last little point, just in terms of the overall curation of the event, is finding a way that these performances can all happen at the same time, but have their distinct engagements with temporality, where some might feel like the audience are losing time, others might feel like time is being stretched and become quite tedious, and trying to craft the way in which the audience, so when they leave, they've gone through a bit of a time whirlwind, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. And I think, Margaret Price has written a really interesting book around disability called Crip Space Time, and she links these two. And she also links the kind of conceptual, the time we need to actually shift our minds. So we need time to think and kind of renegotiate our own thinking as well. And I mean, this is something that I think these 3 days have done. There's been lots of provocations to thinking, but I'm not sure we've had time to process. So I feel slightly like I'm overloaded, but also I don't want to lose anything. So I'm trying to decant for later. But thank you so much, both of you. Very rich, very different papers, but very, I think, connected. And in terms of methodologies, whose voices, but I would also say in what ways. So thank you very much for your papers, and we look forward to being able to reflect on them later when they come out in the archive. So thank you. We're looking forward to the next session, which is a panel on festivals and festival making as choreographies of border crossings and worlding that begins South African time at 11:15. So we have a short, just enough time to make a cup of tea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Yvette.